I think what may be changing right now, and I've yet to prove this yet, but I'm trying to, I'm thinking about what this looks like is code is cheap now. These LLMs can bust out these code like very, very quickly. I've talked to a few people again last week around how, someone vibe coded a bunch of stuff. But one thing that they did do is they wrote a bunch of tests. They wrote the tests in order to figure out what the specs are. They were able to blow out their entire code base and rewrite it into a new language as long as they have the tests in place. And is refactoring dead? I don't know. Like, again, like this is very controversial, but code is cheap, right?
Cassie Shum is the Vice President of Ecosystems and Interop at RelationalAI, where she specializes in designing and deploying AI-driven, data-intensive systems built on relational knowledge graphs. Cassie brings over 20 years of experience as a software engineer, architect, and technology leader. Prior to RelationalAI, she spent more than a decade at ThoughtWorks, holding senior leadership roles, and was a contributor to the ThoughtWorks technology radar. Cassie and I actually had the chance to work together at ThoughtWorks, sometimes even on the same account. So I'm particularly excited to have her here. I'm not at all jealous that she got to contribute to the technology radar and I didn't, but that's okay. Her technical background spans distributed systems, microservices, cloud platforms, and a growing focus on semantic layers, knowledge graphs, and AI-enabled decision systems. She's a passionate advocate for engineering excellence and increasing the representation of women in technology. I've wanted to talk to her for a while now about how to move from LLM hype to production-grade AI, and the critical data architecture needed for AI-driven enterprises, and to ask her, isn't a knowledge graph just a data structure? So today, she's our guest on the Engineering with AI podcast. Cassie, thank you so much for coming.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Kyle, for having me. This is really great.
I'm glad you think so. I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, I've been watching you guys at RelationalAI for a little while, and you guys are doing some really cool stuff. But like, how we talked about your bio a minute ago.
Sure.
What would you add? And do you want to talk about sort of how you got to RelationalAI?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it might be worthwhile to talk about how I got to relational AI, which maybe will answer the what we're doing in a way. So I've been at Relational for probably about 3.5 years now, which I don't know, went by just like that. And then also seems quite long as well with everything that's going on.
Right.
But I ended up joining Relational AI because when I met the founder, Moham, I was actually still at ThoughtWorks. And I was thinking about, as you put in my bio, is like, I think about enterprises. I think about how do you actually model real life enterprises, domains, and things like that. And then even more so, I thought what was an interesting proposition was how do you actually move this business logic that is spread across all these distributed microservices? And if you know they're not going to change that much, how do you actually put that closer to the data? And of course, the first thing I thought of was like, what, Sprox? Like, what stored procedures? What are we talking about here? Like, no. So, the skeptical thought worker in me was like, yeah, that sounds silly or whatnot. But once I dug a little bit deeper into what a knowledge graph was, I thought, this could be interesting. This could be something here. And so, with a lot of back and forth, I was convinced, joined Relational about 3.5 years ago. And I initially joined as a field engineering lead because I was very close to the customers. I saw a lot of the issues that enterprise customers were having, right? So how do you model your domain? How do you, take care of the sprawl that you have in terms of business logic and things like that? So it was really good to see, upfront what people were actually facing. So, No, I'm excited. I moved to being more of the VP of ecosystem because now I'm looking to not just helping one or two massive customers, but how do we reach through ISVs, different developers, different modelers, and things like that. So
got it.
I just want to get to more people, so.
Yeah. So ISVs, independent system vendors, independent software vendors. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Whichever one that is. And let's rewind for a second. Like when you're talking about, bringing compute closer to the data and you referenced sprocs and stored procedures, like, oh my gosh, no, right? Like, or did you guys actually, like, is that how this works? Like
It is
we're
not how
checking
it
big if
works.
statements and okay, good.
If it was, then I wouldn't be here right now. Absolutely not.
Just
No.
making sure. And okay. I expected that that's how it went, but I wanted to check. Okay, cool. So, I mean, you and I were talking about this when we were preparing, right? And we were like, what the heck is a knowledge graph? I mean, isn't that just what Neo4j does? Like,
Yeah.
but I expect there's more to it. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so what is a knowledge, graph like, and maybe even like start with the data structure a little bit
Sure.
but we'll then talk about what do you guys mean when you're talking about building a knowledge graph?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, no, I agree. There's always this misconception between a graph database and a knowledge graph in itself. And of course, Neo4j and different types of graph databases have been very popular for a long time. But I think as you and I chatted about, they never took off, right? Like everyone thought that that was a really, really great idea. But somehow it was just very, very hard to actually get it to the general public. There's a few reasons for that, we found. So a lot of it is like it's just super memory intensive, right? If you're trying to traverse over billions and billions of nodes and edges and things like that, Neo4j, like that was hard. We fell over in performance and things like that. So there's a bit of an infrastructure piece that has gotten a lot better over the last 10 years. The last decade has now enabled us to actually look at graph technology in general, whether it be knowledge graphs or Neo4j or whatnot. I think the thing that we're looking at is like, how do you actually separate that compute and storage? And so once you are able to do that, you're able to scale each of these things individually. And these things get just a little bit easier in terms of memory and things. So that's sort of the graph ecosystem, I think. And there are better experts to talk about why and what and how. There's differences between navigational pointers and being able to actually query on top of triples and tuples and things like that. So I won't get into the details of those things. But what I will say is let's talk about the difference between knowledge graphs and then just a graph database. I think the misconception is that people just often think knowledge graphs are just a fancy graph database. And so one of the things that, as I was kind of talking about in my intro that I really loved is what it actually is like, it's when you're combining like the logic and the structure, right? So you have the structure of the database and the nodes and edges. And how do you actually think about, Kyle, you and I used to work together. We are two nodes and that's our edge, right? We also used to work at ThoughtWorks. That's another edge between us. I work at Relational. We're doing this podcast, yet another edge between us. So there are three different edges and it's now representing like what real life, I would say, or real domain would actually look like. The knowledge graph itself is that logic that I just described. You and I are doing a podcast together. We used to work at ThoughtWorks together. We used to be on the same team together. Those are three semantic pieces of information you are now baking into those edges, into a knowledge graph. And so when you have this semantically rich, interesting information between all of these different nodes, gosh, you can imagine you're not just, retrieving data anymore. You're actually inferring reason over these types of things. The connection between you and I probably looks a lot stronger given the semantics I just said. So I hope
Yeah.
that helps in terms of thinking about what a knowledge graph is.
No, it does. When you were describing, your work there, you were talking about modeling an enterprise. And there was this part of my brain going like, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we've always been doing in writing code. But this sounds like, no, like you're building like a singular model of an enterprise or at least connected models of an enterprise. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting and just something to note is that, we're in pretty big enterprises right now and supporting them. And what we're finding is if you're thinking about the knowledge graph in itself, everybody thinks about data. Of course, there's like thousands and thousands and thousands of tables that maybe an enterprise have. But if you think about the knowledge base, the ontology that the semantic layer sits on, there's actually not that many concepts, right? One of the biggest telecom companies that we work for right now has about 300 main concepts. That's you can handle that, right? Like that is something that can actually be the root of a lot of source knowledge and knowledge base and things like that. So it's very interesting stuff. I'm excited.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So and it's funny when you talk about the relationships between us and you and I and all of this, my brain sort of goes to like, I don't know, like looking at CRM data and connections with customers, but also potentially interdepartmental customers. My head goes to very like person style relationships. But I imagine there's others. Like, what am I missing, or do you want to deep dive into those? Like, yeah, help us think about that part.
Yeah, there is incredibly, like, I can name a lot of different use cases right now. I think the main one that we just talked about is like how people are connected, and you can see LinkedIn and Facebook and those types of companies are actually built on their own internal
Their
knowledge
graphs.
graphs, right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
they have knowledge graph has been around for a very long time, but really only these massive companies are able to maintain their own internal knowledge graph. So making this exposed to the outside world is my goal, obviously. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think some of the use cases that we're looking at, the big one that we're working with right now is supply chain, right? So forget people for a second. I mean, if you think about just the normal manufacturing supply chain use case where I have 3 or 4 warehouses, I have supplies in these different warehouses, I have trucks that go between these different warehouses and things like that. I've described 3 to 4 different concepts right now. And then the relationships between them would actually describe either the distance, the time, like where they are, how many things they have. I mean, the number of semantics is endless when you think about even just these 4 concepts, right? And I think the power that you get out of something like a knowledge graph is with these semantics and with this kind of data that you have connected with each other, you can start to predict things. So as I said, it's not about just retrieving how many items are in one warehouse. Now I can apply things like solvers or prescriptive analytics to say, hey, if this warehouse closes down, how does everything else reroute? Right. And so this is where mathematical optimization comes in and looks at these different nodes and edges and semantics that we've placed on there. And now we can predict, like, okay, reroute all of these different trucks and go down this route. And this is the most efficient way of doing it. And so that's a really great use case. And if you think about supply chain, if I look far enough back, it's like, oh my gosh, that's a graph again, right? And maybe I've been here for too long, but everything I look at is a graph now. It's like
Yeah,
graph,
yeah,
graph, graph, graph.
yeah.
So,
No, I
because
get
there's
that.
always interconnectivity between anything and everything. So, yeah. So
Right,
that's
right.
another good
So,
example.
well, and to your point, so we're going beyond like, what do I have in my my DC, my distribution center, to like what if kinds of questions. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that seems powerful, right? Like, I
Yeah,
mean, ERPs have been around for a long time that have been able to sort of like try to get their arms around all this, and
sure.
one could argue that they do or don't, right? You could have that argument.
Yep.
But I don't know that they're getting that deep into the what if modeling kind of things, and if so, it's probably pretty clunky. So that seems really cool. Like how does that work? I mean, is there like a chat interface where someone's asking like, what if we shut down this warehouse, or how does that part go?
Yeah, no, I mean, they, weirdly enough, it's like this question was planted is that we are actually working on our like UI interface to be able to answer some of these questions based off your data model. And this is where LLMs really play a huge part in our company right now, because, before, you had to actually call some of these solver methods on top of your ontology or on top of your knowledge graph in itself, and then get that result. And then you have an expert just kind of figure out what that result actually meant. Now, we actually are creating sort of more of a platform where you have your knowledge graph. You can ask questions on top of it, any dimensional type of semantics, like historically, what happened last year? How many TVs did I sell in March of 2025? Right. And so that's the kind of thing that, we traditionally were able to do, like from like Tableau and BI tools and things like that. You can use that same structure, that same knowledge graph to ask those previous questions. But now you can actually say, hey, what do you think I'm going to sell based off of my historical knowledge in 2026? And how should I reallocate my supply chain based off of that projection? Now, that to me, like, is those are really, really great questions that you can have like an interface like Snowflake Intelligence, OpenAI, Claude Code, like, because we are utilizing the MCP framework in order to expose these tools and these reasoners that we have already created from years ago. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
no, it's
Okay.
cool. So
So I can only imagine the extra advantage that, in terms of forecasting and projection and those kinds of things that you would have. Like, you've got so many more paths open to you with the proper knowledge graph instead of just
sure.
sort of like relational data or BI, whether it's a lake house or an old school data warehouse or
That's right.
whatever. Okay, cool. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Okay. So, how does this tie into the tools that we're all using? Like, do you have a story there for us?
Yeah, I think I have a couple of stories. So I think we have more of the external stories of, and I sort of touch upon this a little bit, of how we're utilizing AI and utilizing some of these tools that are now being accelerated is a great word. Like, my gosh, even just looking back, February of 2025, everything's changed. And so being evolvable, changing with that is a huge thing for us, for sure.
We didn't
Um,
have Moltbot in January, or maybe
we
we
did
did. I don't know.
not, and I don't know
Right?
if we still
Yeah.
should, but
Well, yes. Another good
but
point.
that's
Yep.
another podcast.
Yep. It is.
But I do think so in terms of how we're using the tools more for customer adoption, I think has dramatically improved. Sort of like, not only I would call it in two different buckets, like sort of the analysts as an audience, like how do you Q&A on top of a knowledge graph, and being able to utilize our LLMs and this chat function and these reasoning functions to expose through MCP is huge for us. So I think those are the tools that we're using within our product in order to drive more consumption, more engagement, and really give our audience like a holistic narrative, right? I don't have to jump to this pipeline or this pipeline, or everything's kind of bundled up, and I can just sit here and have a conversation with my knowledge graph about all these reasoner capabilities and things like that. I think that's one aspect of it. I think yeah, I think internally for our teams, we're using the tools. We've used them poorly. We're using them a little bit better now. And so being able to build this software has greatly and dramatically changed as well. So just keeping up with everything and ensuring that our teams are understanding what this means for them, what does this mean for the development life cycle, et cetera, has been huge for us. So happy to go into
Right.
that as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you mentioned analysts, and I've still got my head on supply chain from where we were, I guess I can imagine like a supply chain analyst sitting down with like similar to the way I sit down with Claude Code and say, oh, by the way, this is something that I'm trying to get done. So I'm imagining that supply chain analyst doing a similar thing,
Absolutely.
like, we're trying to reduce our costs and such, and we think it's the following factors. Like, what do you think? And it goes and says like, yes. And, so
That's right.
is that right? Am I getting it? When I think about Q&A, is that how I should think about it?
That's absolutely right. It can be just that simple, which is actually what we're aiming for. Because when it gets complicated, then we lose people, right? It's like, wait, what do I need to do now? How do I get the answer, et cetera, et cetera. And so, being able to have just that simple dialogue with the chat interface to the knowledge graph is huge.
Yeah. Sort of start with our goals, and this is something we've learned, and maybe it's in your graph, maybe it's not. But what can you add? How would you plan this? What are we? Oh, okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. As you mentioned, you guys are using these tools in order to build the thing too, right?
Yes.
And you and I, our background goes back to like making software, right?
Yes.
I can remember having meetings with you about like, what different pieces of tech that this tech lead was going to pick up, and whether or not we had gotten it done, and was the customer happy with us? And
oh my gosh.
that's another story. But so all of this stuff, like we didn't know these tools were coming right back then. So from where you are, I don't know how much you can see, but to the extent that you've got stories about how teams inside of relational AI are using these tools, like, what are you seeing? Like, one of my sort of basic questions is like, do all the best practices stand? And I think for the most part, like, yes, testing, oh my God, like probably we need more testing, not less.
Sure.
CI, probably, but who cares what I think? Like, what are you seeing in teams when it comes to what tools are people using? Let's kind of start there. What are
Sure.
the favorite generative AI tools that people are actually using in
Sure.
in
Sure.
in work, or what are you using?
I use probably what my team and our company uses. We are sitting square in Cloud Code. We see the power behind their models and very developer centric. Pretty good. And it's interesting how if you asked me this 6 months ago, it could have been Cursor, but as people jump from jobs to job and Cursor guy went back to Cloud Code, now we see Cloud Code. So I think it's a race, right? And so I think the thing to think about is we're keeping an eye on what's the best models coming out. What are the tools that make us the most efficient, but at the same time, we can't be mired in just keeping up with everything too. So there's a nice balance
Right.
that we have to deal with
Yep.
as well. So I think that's one aspect of it. Um, so yeah, we're using like IDs like VS Code with Claude Code plugins and things like that. I think when we actually look at the different agent technologies, we're looking at different agents that are helping us with story writing, or agents that'll help us with eval frameworks, or specifically for us, agents that help with modeling. Right, modeling is actually I talk about this beautiful knowledge graph, but you got to get there. You got to model it into a knowledge graph, and that's not easy either. So, being able to look at some of our agents, and they can, LLMs are really good at pattern matching, right? So if you give them a pattern, they are able to use that pattern and apply it, right? And especially with a human in the loop, you can sit there and validate and verify and all of these types of things. So we use them for various different things. I will say, regardless of the tool, if it's Claude Code, if it's Cursor, if it's any other model that we're using, one of the biggest things I found, and I know you'll appreciate this with our ThoughtWorks background, is our foundationals matter even more now. Like, and that, I don't know if that surprised me, or that just sort of like came front and center. And I think like what I would call like this LLM move, right? It just accelerated everything. And when you accelerate everything, then you see the outputs much faster. So just think about 10 years ago, if you have two
Okay.
different teams, one team doesn't test, the other team tests, you don't
Right.
really see that output very quickly. Like they have the same code, it's working, whatnot. But what we do see is years later, which code base was sustainable, right? And which code base turned into a big ball of mess. And so we could see that if we could sit there long enough to be there 5 years later, right? And I think like we have always talked about these foundational practices is like do this because in the long run it's going to be good for you. And now with the acceleration of these tools, I'm saying do it now and you're going to see the output pretty quickly if it works or if it doesn't work because of this acceleration. So I think foundations it's sort of proving us right, which I kind of love. It's like, oh, testing, we should be testing this whole time. Yes, this is something I've been spouting for over two
Yep.
decades, and
Yep.
someone's finally listening, or like
Yeah.
how do you do spec driven development? How do you actually look at those acceptance criteria? And, everyone's talking about spec driven development. How do you tell your agents to code appropriately? And it's like, oh, given when then, acceptance criteria, things that give actual specification to the system, crazy thoughts, right? So these again are practices that we talked about for years, but now really coming to fruition, which I'm really loving. And you're starting to see the differences of a foundational team and not a foundational team. So I think that's interesting.
So to your point, like I definitely get the feeling that whatever you are, it's going to make you faster of what you are. So if you are putting
Yes,
messes into code bases, you're going to make messier code bases even faster, right?
that's
And
right.
if you are applying engineering rigor, then you're going to do that even faster, right?
Yeah.
So like that totally lines up with what you're saying. I've had a few people say, "Oh, you can't do red green refactor with it." Um, I had one guest that went so far as to invent a framework that allowed him to do red green refactor. Jeff Langer talking about his AADV framework. But nobody's saying like, oh, we don't need unit tests anymore, right? It's just that that specific loop may be more challenging. Um, yeah, I think one of the other questions that I've got for folks though is sort of like, what's it doing to team makeup, right? Like, are we going to need as many developers as we did? Like there used to be sort of a ratio, right? You've got a BA and, call it 3 pairs of software developers and maybe a QA person who's there for like strategic support, but they're not building the code base that developers are. And that was like the stamp that you could just like stamp teams out. Never exactly true, but roughly, that was something that was repeatable. Maybe you could do 4 pairs with a BA. Maybe if you were up to 5, 6 pairs, you might have needed 2 BAs, maybe a junior QA to help out the main QA. But, that was kind of the ratio. Is that
Yeah.
changing now? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought about this question quite a bit, and I do think the typical consultant phrase is it depends for sure. I think but I will follow up with some thoughts here. I think in greenfield, like in a greenfield project and things like that, if there are strong foundational rigor that is either embedded into the process or embedded into the agents, if you will, like I'm finding, at least this is a observation right now, is that like boilerplate, very task oriented type of things can actually be handled by the LLMs. And I think if you direct it well enough and get a repeatable structure involved, then you're saving a lot of time. You're saving a lot of effort, right? And so do you have a team that does a lot of boilerplate? Does it do a lot of task-based type of things? I think you can actually make your team way more efficient by replacing those things with componentized sort of task-oriented agents that will do these repeatable things that are more deterministic and that you can control in a way, right? So I don't think that removes like the architecture, the design, the good practice. Like people have to install the good practices, right? And have to ensure that the models are learning from that type of foundational practices and things like that. So I would say that the makeup of the team, like these functions that you called out, like the analysts, the product manager, the developer, the architect, the QA, like those functions still exist. We need to have them, whether they're represented in an agent or a human or whatnot, or a combination of all of those things. I think that's absolutely still necessary. I think the ratio may change. I don't know what that ratio is because I think it definitely depends on, are you dealing with this entire legacy code base? Because the functions are a little bit different. If you're trying to reverse engineer things, write tests on top of things that never had tests on, and then rewrite that code using the agents, that's a whole nother team makeup that is very different than I'm sitting here in a greenfield world trying to build an interesting app and whatnot. And then there's some, you know, uh, building SDLC kind of things that you can actually automate and things like that. And then, of course, as you know, there's always something in the middle, right? So there are some legacy, some not, and whatnot. So how do you decipher between all of those types of things? And I think human in the loop is the answer still to this day. Would that change in future? I don't know. But today, still need the humans. So,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. And like you, I do wonder if it's going to kind of change the kinds of humans. Like, I wonder if we'll be rewarded by, a lot of my smart friends have always talked about like having a T-shaped person, just meaning the top of the T, you have some breadth, but then the tail of the T, you also have some depth in something, right? Because if you don't have any depth in anything, then you don't like really understand how important depth can be, right? But you also can't have all of the depths, right? Like you are great at Python and polars. I'm better at getting Django to work right. Both of us are useful, in the end. I feel like this is kind of amplifying that too, right? Like Claude Code can be really good at polars. Like,
Oh, yes.
do I need to be good at polars? Like, it's still good to have somebody on the team that has it, though.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, I feel like it's changing that makeup a little bit too. That it can bring some of the technical expertises anyway that we used to have to instill in people or embed in people. Yeah.
Sure. I love that you brought up the T-shaped, or I think it was Kent Beck who did the tier shape, like the paint drips, right? Like because there's many different levels of depths and things like that. I was actually just talking about this a couple of weeks ago with a few folks like Beck and Martin around how do yeah how do we actually look.
Like you do.
Yeah. We had a really nice
Hanging out with Kent
conference.
Beck and Martin Fowler.
I was very lucky to be invited to such a thing, but it was very much a discussion around which parts of the paint drops will the agents be able to take because they are repeatable paint drops, right? Like these are things that happen all the time. And then there's these other depth pieces with there's innovation, there's experimentation, there's new algorithms that we still need humans to really understand and design and things like that. And that depth I think doesn't go away. And I think about this in terms of my company where we have prescriptive analytics folks, we have predictive analytics folks, we have these people that we still need, and not even still need, we very much need because that's our differentiator right there, right? And so that differentiation, uh, sure, an agent can help with sort of the infrastructure around it, but there's some key pieces that I would not leave to the LLMs to solve for us, or then there is no differentiator in this world, right? So, but I do think that there are like patterned type things, these boilerplate type of things where we can hand those over so we can unload our cognitive load to that, which we don't need
Yeah.
to hold in our brains, and actually focus our cognitive load on the thing that matters. Like, how do you actually design the system? How do you actually talk to the business and figure out what they actually want versus what we're assuming, like going back to the human aspect of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
100%. 100%. Love that. Okay. So you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned SpecFlow by name, but you talked about like writing stories, and you also, talked about the importance of having like acceptance criteria you're given when, then,
Mhm.
kinds of things. Like, how, can you talk more about how it's impacting product management and story breakdown, right? Like, and I know in my stamp it out analogy, I talked about BAs, but not product managers. Obviously, that's been another big change over the last sort of 5-10 years. Like,
Yeah.
how are you guys doing all of this? Like, do you find that there's still like a product team and an engineering team, and are the tools they're using different? Are the processes, are they using agents to write PRDs, and are we using agents to read them? Like, how is all that going in terms of the product management and story breakdown?
Yeah, sure, sure. I think for us, the way that, and again, I think it'll differ for any other organization. So it sort of depends on what you guys are used to. But for us, we use our coding tools as still assistants, right? Like it helps us open up the ideas, right? So from a product management point of view, sure, we have these hypotheses, we have these, theories about how, these things can do certain things. And but what we would do is we say, hey, LLM, go look around at the competitive landscape and give us some ideas on what our competitors are right now.
Mm.
And we may have an idea of what they are, but we may not have the full spectrum. And the beautiful part about our LLMs is, boy, they scour the internet webs like
Oh my gosh.
crazy,
Yep.
right? Much
Yep.
faster than
Yep.
we can. So
Yep. And
it's good.
deeper.
Yeah,
Yep.
and much deeper. So it's good to utilize that to say, okay, give me the competitive landscape. And of course, there's hallucinations and things like that. But as long as you have a product manager siphoning through this and using it more of as a source and understanding what we're trying to accomplish, I think I'm seeing our product management team being a lot more strategic and thinking more externally into like how our product's going to live in this world versus internally, oh gosh, how do we deliver this particular feature or function or whatnot, right? So
Right. Right.
I
Right.
think I'm seeing that as a shift. And then, of course, like once you boil down that product roadmap into specific feature sets and things like that, then again, it's not that we don't write the PRDs or the stories or whatnot, but we have the LLMs help us. And as I do as an architect, I'm like, okay, this is my assumption. This is what I'm going to write down, and this is what I want to give to my teams. LLM, go check me. Am I missing anything? And I have it like I'm human. Like I'm like, oh, I forgot about that security thing. I should probably touch upon that. So again, it's just back and forth and trying to use it as another resource, right? Because it's a very powerful resource. So I think it behooves us not to use them, but it also, you get in trouble if you rely too much on them because we have to rely on our own expertise to make decisions based off of like how we siphon through these sources. So yeah.
Yeah. I love what you're saying about having it review work, though. Like, one of the great ironies of all of this is that one of the best ways to figure out if an LLM has steered you wrong is to ask an LLM to check its work. And yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's
just the
fair.
world we're living in. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and you touched on how architecture and planning have changed a little bit, right? Like having an LLM review an architectural plan. What more can you say about that? Like, what else are you seeing there?
Yeah, oh gosh, so much. But I'll try to boil it down a little bit. I think back in the day, like in the way that, we've sort of thought about the agile iterative approach, it's like, okay, let's do some test-driven development. Let's start somewhere, and then let's actually start writing those tests, writing the feature, refactoring, and that in its own right helps us design the code base, right? And again, I might say something a little bit controversial here because I truly believed in refactoring all the time, like refactor, make your code base cleaner and things like that. I think what may be changing right now, and I've yet to prove this yet, but I'm trying to. I'm thinking about what this looks like. Is code is cheap now. These LLMs can bust out these code like very, very quickly. I've talked to a few people again last week around how someone vibe coded a bunch of stuff. But one thing that they did do is they wrote a bunch of tests. They wrote the tests in order to figure out what the specs are. And they were able to blow out their entire code base and rewrite it into a new language as long as they have the tests in place. And is refactoring dead? I don't know. Like, again, like this is very controversial, but code is cheap, right? And so it goes back to how do we change the way we think about, test test and red green
Red
refactor
green
testing,
refactor. Yeah,
all of
yeah.
those kind of things. I think it doesn't go away. I think it changes how we think about it. So we were looking at like, how do we actually refactor the tests? Like, how do we actually look and make sure that those specs are the gold plate, right? And so now that code is commoditized, a little bit born now. So what does that look like in terms of your architecture, your design, your infrastructure? So again, I don't have the answers, but I have the questions for sure, and we're trying to
Yeah.
prove some of these things out. So yeah.
I, I'm interested in where you're going, very much so, right? Like, so Pete Hodson was on, and he talked a little bit about how like the carrying cost of code is still real.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just like write too much code and have it not matter. And I think that's true. And also Jeff Langer, when he was on, he was talking about how like maybe the goal isn't so much like getting perfect code, but getting a really great test base that helps the agent see what code to write, so that you could almost just rewrite the code base. We used to talk about architectures that could deal with the replacement of any component really, really easily. Like that you should design for like, what did we call it? Like disposability, like
Mm-hmm.
being like an
Yeah.
important architectural fact. Like, yeah, this thing won't live forever,
Yeah.
right? So we should build it with that in mind.
Yeah.
And now I'm wondering if that's shifting, like you're saying, to code, like where if you had a good enough spec, you could just rebuild it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. Like, but as you say, that is not yet proven that will work. So
Yeah, and the counter argument to this, again, not a few conversations. Even Jez Humble said this, like these LLMs still don't know how to debug the code base very well, right? And
yeah,
so if you go back
yeah,
to the Amazonian thought process of like you build it, you run it. Can the LLMs build it? Yes, they're building something.
yeah,
Can they run it?
yeah.
Can they support it? Would you trust an LLM to be on call for this? And so I do believe that day may come, but today it's not quite there yet. So I think we need to remember that as well, right? So
I'm with
something
you.
interesting there.
A colleague used something I had not heard earlier this week. I guess there's an old IBM quote about like, yes, computers can do a lot of things, but they can't be responsible for the decisions yet.
Yeah,
And
not yet.
I think that's still true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we talked about product management, architecture. We've gotten into software development. We've talked about testing a little bit. Like, in my own personal experience, and listeners are probably tired of me saying this now, but I don't get to use this stuff at work, and this remains true. I've been now saying this for months, but I do get to use it a lot on a side project. So this side project, it's just me, and it's not pre-revenue, but it's sort of in that 0 to 1 phase, and definitely pre-market fit, right? So a lot of the way I work with it is very much like I sit down and talk to it like I am a technical product manager, right? And I try to break things down into something that's fairly small, right, in order to kind of manage context. But in the end, I'm usually doing the testing, right? Like I don't, maybe I'm missing it. Like maybe it's probably something I need to add. Now, I ask it to write a lot of unit tests, and I review those unit tests, and I make sure that those unit tests cover what I want them to cover. But really, I'm still doing a lot of the testing though, right?
Sure.
Like I
Like
don't,
more
I
the
don't ship
holistic
something.
testing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
if I just asked it to go change an important page on the website, I'm going to look at it with my eyeballs,
Sure.
right? We are not going to deploy it until that has happened.
Sure.
But there's this other part of me, which is like, well, Kyle, we've been talking about like good functional suites forever, and you shouldn't have to do that. But I don't know. I feel like I'm testing more now with this stuff, not less. But I can't tell. Maybe this is just sort of like me and my side project, and that's the approach. What are you seeing? Are we, like you said, the paint drips? Some of those we're going to be able to get an agent to do. When you have larger teams than just Kyle, are you finding that like that is working, where you can get the agents to test? Or yeah, tell us more about that.
I think, yeah, this is a good question because I think one of the things that we're seeing is that people are moving a lot faster, but we're not validating fast enough, right? And then the models are changing at a rapid pace. So it doesn't surprise me that you're like, I'm going to test more, right? Because there's still a bit of a lack of trust in the LLMs to get it right. They are non-deterministic, which means to us, like, I can't have a repeatable answer, right, to this kind of thing. I think the way that we're trying to approach it is, and I alluded to this earlier, is that if you have more componentized, bite-sized types of things, the LLMs do much better with the context windows and things like that. And so we still are the human in loops that need to break these things down, right? So I talked a little bit earlier about how do you actually have task-based agents? So instead of talking to your agents and say, go do all the things, please go write a bunch of code and finish this feature. Let's go back to our, SDLC, right? Like, agent, you are only responsible for writing the story in this pattern. Write the story, push it to Jira. You, agent, are only responsible, to your point, is actually writing the unit test and then testing that unit test. That's your only responsibility. So I'm starting to see us a little bit more of an orchestration layer to the agents and humans and trying to figure out what all of this actually looks like. I do feel that we are testing more because there's just this inherent mistrust that it's going to get it wrong. Even if it's right, 99% of the time, that poor 1% of the time is what we're anxious about. I think it's ironic because if you put humans, like going back to like devs writing code and stuff like that, it's not 99% time. It's like 80% time they get it right. So it's interesting how our brain and how our trust factor is getting in there. So I believe there will be less testing on our part going forward once these systems become a little bit hardened, right? And like, and until we actually see that system hardened within our own ecosystem. But I hear you because at first I was like, check everything that LLM did. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what it
Yeah.
did. So,
Well, yeah, and I'm probably not describing how I'm actually my actual behavior very well. I think what I'm maybe not doing is spending enough time like trying to write the story so well that I can trust that it will have had a chance to get it right. On some level, what is the mistrust is not so much that it will have hallucinated in an alternate universe, although that still happens. It's a lot rarer now. But it's more like, did I even describe it well? I asked for a UI change. Like, I want to see it. I don't want to, like, I presume this will make it more, the experience better, but will it make the experience better? Right? Like, I'm almost checking my own work through
yeah.
that it did for me in a way. Yeah.
And I think we're like vibing a little bit because I'm actually maybe, and tell me if I'm right or wrong. Is like maybe you feel like you're testing more because the feedback loop is just so much quicker now.
Yeah.
Previously, like changing
100%.
that font on that thing, like maybe it takes many more hours or even a day, whereas it takes a minute now, and you're like, oh, let me look at it, right? And so again, time is cheap here too. So that feedback loop
Yeah,
is
that's a
maybe
good
making
point.
us feel like we're testing a lot more because we're testing faster. It's coming back to us
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're deploying more. I
We're
love it.
deploying
I
more.
love it. Yeah.
So
So when I say integrating software, what comes to mind for you with the LLMs?
Oof. To me, this is like more of our path to prod and integrating into actual real systems and things like that. I'll tell you that I'm still seeing much more human in the loop integration. If you're doing again greenfield, I think that's easier. There's patterns and things like that. But in enterprise, we're seeing a million different types of pipelines, right? And a million different types of ways that people are doing things. There's a lot of like DevOps heavy lifting that we're still doing in order to, like, I would say, integrate into the production pipeline, go through the still same compliance and security guardrails and things like that. Some of those things will be there for a long time, right? Because that's how enterprises run and think about things. I think the guardrails that they have in place may be antiquated and old, and it's at the very, very end. What we could do, like, as you know, going futuristic, is like thinking about taking, not getting rid of guardrails, but taking these guardrails and pulling them closer. Since we have a faster feedback loop now, how do we pull this in and integrate faster, right? And so that's sort of where my head is at. We're not there, right? We're still integrating at the end with all of these different enterprises right now. But I think the next step to thinking about this is how do we enable the enterprises to move these things a little bit to the left, if you will, shift left. So
Yeah, 100%. I think that's right. I think that's a good way to think about it. The other thing that comes up for me with integration is this sort of like the context window limits, like how much I can trust it with like the rest of the code base. Some days it'll think, oh, there's a method over here that I should use. And it's like, no, that's not what that method does. And then other days it ignores the method that it should be using. And it's like, so it's like, I trust it pretty well with whatever code that it wrote during the context session, but it forgot the code it wrote yesterday entirely. So on the literal act of sort of like integrating in terms of like making sure that the code base is cohesive and you don't end up with like the same calculation repeated 100 times, but like we're using things as a library. Once I can tell it, oh, you need to do this, it's pretty good at doing it. But it doesn't tend to think of that, you know, and it doesn't do a great job of realizing like, oh, I should use that microservice that we already built. It'll just start putting it into what it's doing today.
It's like, oh, I could just build it so quickly.
And that's a good point. It can, right?
Yeah, it can.
Yeah.
But I mean, that goes back to modeling. That goes back to us humans in the loop actually showing what does a good domain-driven design architecture actually look like? And how do you feed that, also that piece of information, into the LLM as well? Like, I think about these agents, again, being task-specific. You can think about some of the agents being domain-specific as well, right? And trying to figure out what that actually looks like. So, I don't know.
Oh, nice. I like that. Well, and to your point about modeling, like it's, if you remember to ask it to help you with designing a model, it'll probably be really helpful. And if you ask it to critique the code base and see if it follows that model, it can probably tell you. But it won't necessarily remind you to do that.
Exactly.
You know, right? Like, and there's that human in the loop bit. Keeps coming back to that, don't we? Okay. So you mentioned DevOps a few times, and you talked about path to prod. Infrastructure. Do you see Gen AI changing how infrastructure works?
Yeah. Going back to the same pipelines and sort of task-based type of things. I'm not speaking from experience here, but well, maybe I am a little bit, like, but they only let me do POCs. They don't let me push to prod anymore. But but one thing I will say is being able to spin up like a Docker container and throw it up into Snowpark Container Services quickly, for me as an non-infrastructure person, that was pretty easy to do and to deploy and to figure out like what those endpoints look like and make them public and la 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 and all this stuff. I think there's enough work out there that LLMs see those patterns of how to actually deploy these kind of things. Do we need to check them? 1,000%, for sure. We need to check our pipelines. But it still sits in the bucket for me that it is quite repeatable. And eventually, I think these things, be it very important, will have a lot of help from the LLMs to help us go faster on creating some of our pipelines. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm right where you are on that. Like you're reminding me of my startup work where like, it can make a Docker file for me faster than I can. And it can write the Terraform to get that online faster than I can, and like, cool, do it. I'm pretty sure that if like a proper like AWS specialist looked at all my Terraform, they'd be like, Kyle, this is
please
what
don't
the
do
heck? I
that.
mean, it works, but no, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so there's maybe an element of like, it can do it for us and that is good, but like anything else, human in the loop.
Yeah.
And I could probably even ask it to critique itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that going to be the answer for everything? Oh my gosh.
Maybe. And
Yeah,
then we'll go retire on a beach somewhere.
I love it. Finally.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool. So what about how you hire, staff, train, mentor, like how you choose people? What changes are you seeing there?
I would say, like, I'm the first person to admit we've misstepped quite a few times. We're trying to figure it out like everybody else. I'll share some thoughts around this. I very much was like, okay, my teams are just going to be so much more efficient. Whew, like it's going to be crazy. And no, I still think you need to, going back to like just the core, you need to still hire for aptitude and attitude, definitely. And for me, obviously integrity, right? So I think the aptitude and attitude is super important when it came down this route, right? I would have a lot of like sort of senior, been around for a long time kind of engineers like LLMs, that's a phase. I don't care. I this is my thing, and all this kind of stuff. So to me, that's lacking attitude and, really embracing new tools and technologies coming through. I've had, engineers who I hired with maybe not the aptitude and they're like, well, LM's going to do everything for me. Right. And boy, did I just get LM slop. I just got AI slop, like just terrible and worse. Like, I'm like, just throw that out. I can't even use that. Right. And so I think it goes back to hiring for the attitude, aptitude, and integrity is huge for me now because we need people who can adapt much more quickly. Like your job that was last year may not be your job this year. And you need to evolve to that. So being able to have that flexibility is huge for us. The other bit is really around, being able to learn, like being able to actually learn on the job and figure and just not be the smartest person in the room. Maybe the LLM is the smartest person in the room today, right? And being okay with that as well. So there's a bit of that I've been dealing with when I'm training and hiring and all of these kind of things. And at the very end, it sort of circles back to what we talked about in the very beginning. It's those foundational mindset, right? Like I have found that I don't mean to brag, but like I have pretty good foundations and I get to code again because it's like, okay, like I don't need to learn a syntax to a language anymore. And that takes up a lot of time. And that's what my job doesn't entail, but I can instill these TDD. How do you actually write good acceptance criteria? How do you actually do these componentized type of design and things like that? So if you're able to teach your teams how to think and really use some of these foundational bits and then evolve with that and learn, then I think you're in a better state. But we did have some missteps here and like just assume that LLMs can do everything. It's going to make us go faster. Velocity is going to go through the roof and all these kind of things. And you just have to start thinking about how to measure a little bit differently now of your teams and what they're doing and things like that. So
Yeah.
still learning,
and
by
even
the way.
in a perfect world where it does help you just go faster, is it helping you go the right direction faster, right?
Sure.
Or are you
Yeah.
going off of a cliff faster, or are you going nowhere faster? Like,
That's
yeah,
right.
yep,
Yeah. Yeah.
yep.
I don't
Cool,
want to go off a cliff
cool.
faster. That should be slow
No,
so I can catch myself.
100%. Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah.
So when it comes to enabling teams with these tools, right? Like what's working for you? Because when you guys started 3.5 years ago, like you said, there was no Claude Code yet. So you've already had to deal with some change. What enablement's working at Relational AI?
Yeah, I think we're still a startup, and so we're a little bit lean, and I think we could probably use a little bit more structure in terms of enabling people and teaching people how to use tools appropriately. So there's definitely more to go on that for sure. I do think like there's two parts to enablement for me. One part is really teaching foundationals, processes, ways of working and things like that. And now it's ways of working with all these different tools. So a lot to do there still. And I think because it's such a changing ecosystem, it's hard to keep up, with that kind of thing. So we're trying to figure that out. I do think, though, there's another part of enablement, which is knowledge, right? So, the biggest part of onboarding onto an enterprise, a startup, or any company is like, how do you onboard with knowledge as quickly as possible, right? Your knowledge base. Sometimes it's in Confluence, sometimes it's in GitHub, sometimes it's here, sometimes it's there. I will say the tooling that we have now, the LMs, as I said earlier, is that it is fast at gathering knowledge, right? Like it can say, this is where everything is, right? And I do think we've focused on like, how do you actually aggregate knowledge through the LMs and really understand how decisions are made, where, this code base, feature set is, where it's documented here, and bring that all together. So that's part of enablement and onboarding. I think that's been accelerated based off the LMs, but a bit more work to do on how to use a tool, how to use it responsibly, how to use it very effectively. I think we're all still kind of learning how to do that. So it's hard to give those ways of working when we're like, here's the ways of working 2 months ago. Let's let's see how this goes going forward. So yeah, no, so haven't solved that problem yet, but working on it for sure.
Cool.
Yes.
This is great, Cassie. Thank you. Okay, so there's sort of a few questions I ask towards the end, and I feel like we're getting there. Thank you for how much time you've invested with us.
Yes, of course.
What's something you've learned, right? Like maybe something you thought you were right about, but you've realized recently, and this could be in your personal life, this could be a relational AI, this could be for anything. But what's something that you used to think you were right about, and you've since learned like, oh, wait, no, that's not how that works?
Yeah, I think more of a general vibe, and I'm very happy to admit I was wrong on this one for sure. I think when the first models came out and ChatGPT came out, I knew something big was happening, but I guess I've just been maybe some PTSD from how enterprises and things just move slowly in the software world. I was like, we got time. We got time to figure that out. I was wrong. This is moving at a much faster pace than I myself had anticipated. Both in relational, both in like, it's in our everyday lives. When I talk to Google, it's thinking about stuff like more so than it's ever thought before. Um, and I do think I guess I would say that I was wrong how fast it's going in. So there's so many implications of this that us as a society have not thought about. Like, my teacher friends, my university friends are like, how do we teach students right now? How do we know that they're learning? How do we embed LLMs? Like, what does this actually look like? And this has moved so quickly. Like we're not able to catch up with sort of the ramifications of this, both from a technical perspective, but from a societal perspective. So, yeah, I don't, I don't have an answer, but I was definitely wrong about how fast this was going to move. So for sure.
Well, you and me both. And I've read a few LinkedIn posts talking about the stages of grief of like, I don't believe it. And like, so I think we are in good company. I think you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Interesting point too about education. Like often we sort of go to like, what's it going to be like for new junior developers? Like, how are they going to become, trained and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is a valid question. But I like where you're going, right? Like, how does education work now, right? Like, how do you even know? Like, did the LLM answer that, or did the kid? And is that okay or not? Like, what are we even doing now?
Yeah. And are we reacting? Like, there are some people who I'm hearing from, they're like, we just ban LLMs from the classroom. And it's like, you can't do that either, because that's a major part of our life, our ecosystem. How do you think more proactively and embed it into it and make it sort of your assistant, right? And actually embrace that, teach people how to actually use that. Someone will always game the system for sure. And, sure, all of these things. But again, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but it's one of these things where I'm having active conversations with some of my friends, in this world, and it's hard. I'm not saying it's as easy. Like the entire industry, education, different industries will be uprooted by this, and so it's how we react to that, I think, is the question here. So, yeah,
100% true. Yeah. Okay. Lighter question. What is something that's giving you joy right now?
Kyle, I'm having fun. Like this is actually like a lot of fun. And I don't mean to put you in the same bucket as me, but I was so excited when I first started my engineering career, and I coded something and then something came up and I saw that button and I was like, wow, how cool is that? And then I took a a turn to management and people and dealing with enterprise and legacy organizations, and recently I've been coding again because I have this beautiful assistant of mine that's so much faster. And I'll be honest, it's experimentation, all of these things, proving out a proof of concept. It's something that I don't have to assign to one of my teammates anymore. I do in some things, but some of them I just take for myself. And I think that's really fun. And that may speak to how terrible of a coder I was or whatnot, but I'm proud and having fun with that now. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Cool. Cassie, thank you so much for coming on the show today and spending some time with us on the Engineering with AI podcast.
Awesome. All right.
They're small, highly maneuverable, and in some respects, they think for themselves.
Robots.
Exactly.